Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I am going to be discussing all of the books that I read in the month of February. So February was a pretty interesting reading month, I would say. I read 6 books, which I actually only completed 5 of them. One of them was a DNF. For the books that I did read, the ratings were really all over the place. I had a 2.5 star, a 3 star, a 3.5 star, a 4 star, and a 4.5 star. And the book I DNF. So a little bit of everything. There was one book I was not able to get a hold of from my February TBR. I get comments pretty frequently, people talking about or mentioning, asking how it is that I get my TBR videos out so early in the month, why I do them so early. And that is why I do not own most of the books on my TBR. And so I try to do my TBR pretty early in the month to make sure I can get a hold of everything. This month it did not pan out. I'm going to try to squeeze that book into March's reading, but we'll see what happens. I also continued reading Way of Kings. I'm participating in a Stormlight Archive read-along currently with my friend Yolene from Yolene Reads and a few other people, which I think we're probably going to end up having our live discussion. It sounds like maybe early to mid-April. So I'll be sure to keep everyone posted, keep you all posted on what that day is whenever I have more details. So as usual, I think I'm going to talk about the books in order from the one I like the least all the way up to the one I like the most. That way we can end on a high note. So let's talk about some books. So the first book that I'm going to talk about, and this was actually the first book that I read in February, it was Salvaged by Madeleine Roux. This is the book that I ended up DNFing. This is a sci-fi novel, and it is about a woman that has this sort of mysterious past that we don't really know a whole lot about, and she has gotten this job as sort of a space janitor. She ends up going with a crew on this specific mission to the ship that has been infiltrated by, what is it called? What are they calling it? A parasitic alien. And the crew on the ship is very slowly, they're all starting to sort of lose themselves. The description, whenever I originally read the synopsis, I remember just being incredibly interested in this book, but that's just something that it just sounds like the kind of story that I would really, really get into. And the first quarter of this was really interesting. I think I quit right around the halfway point. It started out pretty interesting and exciting, but it got less and less so as the story progressed, which is the exact opposite of how a book should be. I think we could probably all agree on that. You should become more and more interested as the book progresses. I don't know, it just kind of felt like halfway through the plot was at just a standstill and nothing was happening. At that point, I had lost all interest in finding out what happens, and so I was just trudging through this, so unfortunately I DNF'd it. The next book up the list is You Should Have Left by Daniel Kelman. This is a kind of a horror thriller-ish sort of story. It's just a little novella. It is the story of a family that they go to this house. They don't move into it. They just go there on vacation, and this house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, which is the exact same premise of House of Leaves. The reason I had picked it up is because a friend of mine, a coworker, actually, I was just trying to describe House of Leaves to her, and she was like, "Oh, did they make that into a movie?" No, they didn't make House of Leaves into a movie, but they did make You Should Have Left into a movie with Kevin Bacon. I researched this after the conversation she and I had, and so they made this movie that's very similar to House of Leaves that is based on a book, so naturally I had to pick up the book because I loved House of Leaves so much. I wanted to know what this book was about. I love the concept. Let me just get that out. First and foremost, I loved it in House of Leaves. That was one of my favorite books that I read last year. So the concept is, in my opinion, a 5-star concept. This book really was a fail for me, though. I wound up giving it 2.5 stars. And I think the main reason is that the writing style was just absolutely not for me. The author employed this sort of technique of frequently cutting off sentences right in the middle. It was very heavy-handed. He did it quite a few times. It was very distracting to the story. And also for this type of concept, I think that this book should have been longer. It should have been a full-length novel. I just don't think it was very well written. The concept wasn't explored very well. I'm definitely curious to watch the movie. I'm sure I will, but the book itself, it was just a miss for me. The next book up the list is Winterworld by A.G. Riddle. This book it's a sci-fi novel, and it is set in a world where another ice age is setting in on the Earth. These astronauts are sent out into space to kind of figure out what is going on. This book didn't really work very well for me. I think that as far as the writing style went, I think that the writing style was actually really enjoyable. Like I think I would probably consider picking up another book by this author. But the big problem that I had with this book is that for me, this book translated less as a sci-fi novel and more as a sci-fi romance mashup. There are two characters in here that have this sort of love story going throughout the book that is a very kind of will they won't they type of romance, and it just I don't know. I was not into that. I don't like my hard sci-fi type books to have like a strong romantic element to it. I did not realize that was going to be a thing going into it from the synopsis. It doesn't sound like that's a thing, but that's a thing in this book. So, it may work for you if you like books to have like a strong romantic component. You may really enjoy this book. But for me, I don't want romance in my sci-fi novel, so unfortunately in that regard, it didn't really work for me. But like I said, I did enjoy the writing style. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I think it was just the style of the writing style that kind of kept it from being any lower than that for me. But yeah, I had to knock it down a little bit for these surprise romance elements. So yeah, 3 stars for Winterworld. The next book on the list is Unsouled by Will White. This is the first in a series. It is the first in the Cradle series, and this is a fantasy novel, kind of more of a high fantasy type of novel. The world that it is set in, the people are sort of tested for these kind of almost these affinities, these sort of abilities when they're young. They're tested when they're very young for these abilities, and kind of they spend their lives dedicated to honing these abilities. And the story follows this young man whose name is Lyndon, and he is tested when he's a boy, and it is discovered that he has no affinity for anything. In other words, he is unsouled. And so it's really about him trying to overcome all of these obstacles because of the way he's seen by the people in the society. Overall, I really enjoyed this story. I really like a good underdog story. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It being the first in a series, I came away from it with a whole lot of questions about this world that the book is set in. It wasn't as well developed as it could have been. And also it has a fairly structured magic system. I came away from this book feeling like I really didn't have a fundamental understanding of the magic system. I don't know if anyone else felt that way. Honestly, if you have read this book and you do understand the magic system in it, please talk to me in the comments down below, because I would genuinely like to understand it a little bit better. So yeah, I wish that I had understood it a little bit better. That being said, I think that the story was really fun and interesting, and I will very likely continue with the series, which is saying a lot. If you know me at all, you know I'm not a huge series person. I never really feel like I have to continue in series, but I think I probably will continue with the Cradle series. So yeah, overall, really enjoyed Unsouled. So the next book up the list is Sunreach, which was co-written by Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Patterson. This is a novella. It is set between the second book in the Skyward series, which is Starsight, and the third book, Cytonic, which just came out. There are 3 novellas between those 2 books, and this one is the first in that set of novellas. And I honestly can't say a whole lot about the plot, since it is kind of in the middle of a series. But this book, I feel like the main focus of this book was sort of to shed light on this kind of species that's in the Skyward universe, and kind of help us readers understand it a little bit better and how it sort of plays into the bigger picture. I really, really enjoyed this book, actually. I ended up giving it 4 stars because it does have a focus on this species that I absolutely love and am really fascinated with. You know, it's pretty action-packed, pretty adventurous, and so I was really engaged with the story and really enjoyed it. I did knock it down 1 star because there is another book, another sci-fi book that I read this month that has this kind of romantic interest, this sort of love interest that I was not really into at all. I don't know, there was just like a whole lot of mooning in the book, which I'm not into. That's okay though. That's okay. I still loved the book because for the other reason that I mentioned. And I love the Skyward universe. Like I don't know, I just really love it. If you have read Skyward and Starsight and you really enjoy that series and haven't gotten to this yet, I definitely recommend that you pick it up. So we've made it to the last book on the list, my favorite book that I read in the month of February, and it was The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moers. And this is I would say this is a fantasy novel, a little bit more of like an urban fantasy. And this, I did not expect to love this book as much as I did, but this was a fantastic book. It is told from the perspective of a character who has lost this sort of mentor figure in his life, and this mentor had left him a manuscript of this story that is just the most beautiful, wonderful story that has ever been written, but it doesn't say who the author is. And so our protagonist sets off to the city of Bookholm to try to figure out who wrote this story, this short story. And in searching for this author, ends up kind of getting sucked into this undercurrent of the city, this sort of underworld, I guess you could call it. He gets way in over his head in this situation. This book, it feels very difficult to describe. The storyline is very complex and it is written in a style that I have never encountered before. The characters in this story are all dinosaurs, basically. They're dinosaurs. But what's so funny about it is that you would think that a book that has the characters that are all dinosaurs, that it would be very silly and feel almost like a kid's book or something, but it does not. Like, this is very much an adult novel, and it takes itself very seriously as far as like the writing style and quality. Like, this book is very, very, very well written. In fact, it's almost a little too well written. It can come across as being just a little bit dense. In fact, I ended up taking off a half a star for that. I gave this book 4.5 stars. But the story itself is so captivating and it's so creative and well thought out. The writing style is so smart and just very well executed. I honestly wish that I had given myself a little bit more time to read it. I tried to read this in like 5 or 6 days. So if you do decide to pick this up, just know, give yourself a little extra time to get through it. The writing style is a little bit heavy, but the story is absolutely worth it. Yeah, I just absolutely loved The City of Dreaming Books. So I think that is going to be it for me today. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of February. I would be very curious to know if you have read any of them and what you thought about them, or if you read anything particularly interesting in February. I really hope that you will talk to me about it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.